you know, even though that looks like it's suspect, that perhaps it's okay, and don't necessarily call it in. We haven't formally charged anyone at St. Pete's, but I just, for my 2 cents, whatever it's worth. I'm not picking on St. Pete's. I would say it's probably of every hospital. I think there's this sense that we want to believe the parents and they wouldn't actually do something like this, so we'll believe what they're telling us, even if it seems a little fishy. My response is you're protecting yourself by calling in.
I would think that in a town like this where there is only one hospital, that it would become pretty obvious if it was very long term just based upon medical records.
But then there's urgent care too.
Yeah. That's all St. Pete's now too.
You would hope. You know, we had a situation, unfortunately, where a child was abusive head trauma. It was abusive head trauma case, which is the term now for what used to be shaken baby syndrome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the child ended up in the ER as a result of that. What we found in looking through the medical records is, the child had been in the ER before and had 2 black eyes and was like 4 months old. And it was never reported. So there are cases where, I don't know what the person was thinking there, why that wasn't called in. You know, I don't know, a kid like punches itself, or, I mean, usually the injury is a result of pulling on, you know, this kind of area, or even to get the black eye thing going on. But whatever reason, it wasn't ever reported. So that's a case where you would think maybe if that was reported, we could have intervened, like kind of the whole point that you're a mandatory reporter. Maybe nothing would have happened, but I would have hoped that we would have at least had a shot to maybe save that kid from, you know, blindness and everything else that
So
happened.
did anything happen with the hospital for when that was discovered?
Our office wrote a very nasty letter.
Oh, okay. And when did
I don't know
that-
if that's, we didn't charge them criminally.
When did that take effect, that particular,
This statute?
yes,
Wow, now you're testing my knowledge.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I have to look that up. I do not know the answer to that
That goes
question.
back to the 70s.
It's like forever ago, but I shouldn't say forever ago. Sorry, Bill. I'm just saying that because you set yourself up, you know. I would not have even mentioned it. And you know, I blink. I've been here for 8 years. I started when I was like 25, and I'm like, oh my God, what happened to me these last 8 years? So now you know how old I am too. But all right.
In other words, it was done before you were born.
Well, yes.
Well, it came out of that federal 1974.
Yeah, 1965. Even
65.
before then. Yep, the first history in the statute is 1965. So I don't know. There's been tons of amendments after that, and I'm not sure what all those amendments have put in. But the mandatory, like under the reporting statute's been there since 1965. I'm not sure exactly when the mandatory reporting, if that's been there since 65 or if that came in the 70s. But at least the statute number has been there since then. So,
thank you.
before I was born.
So what is the level of suspicion that triggers the need to report? Like, you know, if you go to the
Yeah.
hospital, a 2-year-old could have a broken arm because they fell down, or they could have a broken arm because somebody broke it. So, I mean, what?
Well, I think if you have, you know, I always err on the side of what's going to protect you as a professional, and what's going to protect you is if you are at all a little bit suspicious, just to call it in, because it will save you from not, I mean, you've reported it, and then it's not your job necessarily to make that determination. Other people will kind of come in and make the determination. As a doctor, I mean, I don't think you should call in every broken arm that a child has. I'm not advocating that. But if you look at it and you have like a spiral fracture, so it looks like there's more of a twisting action going on, if the story isn't making sense, like whatever they say happened, or it changes, like you talk to one parent versus the other and there's something else that's going on, I think anytime you have someone under the age of 1 that shows up and is not breathing, that perhaps, you know, just to be the safeguard, you know, I mean, SIDS happens, and I know that happens, but, you know, we had a case where everyone just suspected it was SIDS, and then the baby's on the table, and it wasn't SIDS, and so we had a brain bleed, and so that's like 3 or 4 days later that you're then trying to figure out, okay, so now we got to start the investigation where perhaps we could have started this 3 or 4 days ago when the child was initially admitted. So there's kind of that, but I think that's really, it's hard to change. There's we've had lots of meetings with the hospital, and I'm not trying to harp on St. Pete, so I should probably move on to the next people, because obviously, if I get in a car accident, I hope someone decides to save me rather than
Go to St. Pete's.
We know that one, right? Like, I need to do not transport me, they will kill me.
Oh, I know this woman.
Yeah, right? We don't want her to live.
Bottom of the line.
Yeah. We'll see how she would have done in the frontier days. So going along with the same, so we have a nurse obviously in the hospital. We even have chiropractors in there, coroners, dentists. Not all dentists, I think, really think they should be concerned about it. But if you have a child that comes into you at a fairly young age and that mouth is just like not cool, dentists should definitely be. And you're shaking your head. Do you work for a dentist?
I'm a retired dental hygienist.
Okay. I think you cleaned my teeth once.
Perhaps.
Yeah. You were not. No, I'm just kidding. You were not.
So if they have bad teeth, that is a reason for a dentist?
Well, there's a difference between having bad teeth and like just complete neglect. Like they have cavities everywhere.
Okay, I
Their
just didn't
gums are
understand what you were
black.
saying.
Like. But dentists should be reporting it too. And I think unfortunately there are some very good dentists in town, but they're like every other professional. There are professionals that just don't feel the need to report.
Mental health professionals now, do we get into confidentiality? I mean, if mom is getting therapy and says dad is beating the shit out of all the kids.
Has to
They
report
still
it.
have to
Okay,
report
that's
that.
what I
Have to
want to know.
report it, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
all right, then if mom says I am,
Have to report it.
still, then why does the clergy get off?
They don't.
And that's not what I read.
Well, they're wrong. Whoever they are, religious healers, and I have clergy in here too. School teachers, officials, staff. Here, it's on my next page, but I'll get there. Where are we, clergy? Member of clergy, right there.
Yeah, but there was a I was sure that I read it.
Yeah, you did.
Let me go back
Where
to
it said they don't have to,
That's the old
further
one.
down.
which part? Let me see.
I don't know, I didn't mark it.
Oh well, okay. Let me
I'll see
let me
if I
get to
can
that
find it somewhere
section.
along the way.
Clergy is supposed to report. What I will tell you is there's, okay, so there's a difference between a standard of a child and a standard of an adult. If someone comes into you as a therapist or you go into your clergy and you tell them, I murdered Joe, my neighbor. Okay? Murder's already done. There's no imminent risk because Joe's gone. Can't hurt Joe anymore. You then can't tell anyone.
All right.
If it's a child, it's different because it's child abuse or neglect. So tell me where you're at.
41, 3201, 5.
So are you reading these at night? Like, are you like... I'm just kidding. You can't fall asleep, so you're...
I'm tired.
All right. 41, 3, 201,
5.
5.
And actually 5B.
Okay. You might have got me there. Look at that. Okay, so they are supposed to report, and then of course you have exceptions.
Yeah, it looked like an awful lot of exceptions.
Yeah, there are an awful lot of exceptions. So a member of the clergy or a priest is not required to make a report under this section if communication is required to be confidential by canon law, church doctrine, or established church practice. So I guess that depends upon the particular church. They...
In the TV shows, it's always a Catholic church.
Right.
Especially if it's the clergy doing
We do not talk about priests touching little boys.
We're talking about murder, not that.
So, although that's what I do every day. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't touch little boys, but those are the crimes that I prosecute. So, and it doesn't just happen in the Catholic Church, right? It happens in lots of churches. Let's see, what's my other section here? So a member of the clergy or a priest is not required to make a report under this section if, 1, the knowledge or suspicion of the abuse or neglect came from a statement or confession, made to a member of the clergy or the priest in that person's capacity as a member of the clergy or as a priest. 2, the statement was intended to be part of a confidential communication between the member of the clergy or the priest and a member of the church or congregation. And 3, the person who made the statement or confession does not consent to the disclosure by the member of the clergy or the priest. All right, so you got me there. So although above it says a member of the clergy is supposed to, there are lots of exceptions, which basically looks like they don't have to do anything. What I would say that where this has come into play is a situation where, okay, so your confession or your confidential communication, and mental health is not treated the same. So if you're in a therapist,
then that was my initial question.
right. So if you're gonna do something, tell your priest, right? Don't tell your therapist. But sorry, I'm not advocating how to get around the law.
But make sure your priest doesn't see you do it.
Well,
or
yeah.
see your bruised kid.
Yes.
Right,
They
yeah.
see
Right.
it.
They don't see it. And the situation where the thing I can think of most recently that I had was a situation where disclosure comes out about the girl being sexually abused by her stepfather, and they decide to bring the church into it. So rather than him going to confession and talking to the priest about it, or it wasn't actually a priest, it was a different church, but the pastor about it, they brought the pastor and the pastor's wife to the home to do like a intervention of sorts, because she was a little temptress, so the church was going to heal her, and she was maybe going to go off to some camp and get better, because dad wasn't really at fault, stepdad. So in that situation, you're not protected, right? That person
Right.
should have reported because you have another person that's at the table beyond just...
The wife is there.
Correct. The wife is there, the victim was there,
Yeah.
her aunt
It's
was
not a
there,
confidential
you know.
communication.
Yeah, they will try to hide behind that shield, but in that situation, I don't think that it would protect them. So, but thank you for pointing that out. I will make sure to write clergy, just kidding, after. So, school teachers, officials, and staff. I think all of us know that seems pretty clear. September rolls around, our reports at CI like skyrocket, right? Now we're actually seeing kids and teachers are reporting. Social worker daycare, staff of resource or referral grant program. I don't exactly know what that means, but they, I think it's anything that has a grant, that if it's, like Head Start or something like that, that
So some
that
kind
they
of grant
need to-
tied to caring for kids.
Right, that's what I would say. And maybe Bill knows better. Do you know better on that one? It's like one of those, we'll just throw this in and see what happens, I think. But, so foster care, residential, or institutional. So obviously, Show Dare is a mandatory reporter. If you have foster kids in your house and you see something happen, or, with a parent, or they tell you something, then you need to report that. Because often, I will say there's been, a lot of disclosures where kids will feel comfortable with their foster parents, and maybe they haven't disclosed everything that's happened, and then they develop this relationship, and then all of a sudden they're unloading on that foster parent about all the horrible things that happened that we didn't know about, and so then that triggers them to have to report. Peace
Do you ever have
officer.
any problem with them doing that, or do they typically pretty much come forward?
I think unless they're also abusing the children, they come forward. That happens too, unfortunately.
Then are the kids unhappy when they come forward?
Not usually. No, I think that it's more of a relief. I think in my experience, when a child finally discloses, they're ready to talk about it and get it off their chest. So that seems to be more of a relief for them. Now, if they're in the home setting when they disclose, it kind of becomes different because I think a child doesn't understand what's going to happen to them after they disclose, right? So they've disclosed and they've gotten it off their chest and they just want it to stop, but they want everything to stay the same, right? And then their whole family is disrupted, and then they become, the reason for that disruption. And then you get a lot of recanting sometimes that'll happen because they want things to go back to the way that they were. And some of them, won't recant, but they're still mad at everyone and mad because why did you do this? Why did you tear up my family? And they blame the system on it sometimes. So. But it's kind of, it's a case by case basis. And unfortunately, everyone thinks kids lie about this stuff. So if you're ever you're on charity. They don't lie. The facts are like 2% are false allegations of children that actually disclose. So out of 100 cases, you're going to have 2 in which there's what we call a false allegation. And the research of those false allegations, the majority of those false allegations, they kind of come from 2 camps. One is a teenage girl that's trying to change her situation. So she got caught having sex with somebody, oops, and wants to say that, you know, something else happened to kind of get that off of her. Does that make sense? But unfortunately, when I say that, then a lot of people think teenage girls lie about it all the time. But I'm like, well, there's 2 out of 100, and you know how many teenage girls are reporting so. And the other is really, really little kids in custody disputes. Not all custody disputes have them, but really tiny kids. You know, if they get in there and they're like 4 and they're talking about things that you don't expect a 4-year-old to have knowledge of, and they can't get into a memory of, like a sensory memory of like what it felt like or what it's just like very. Dad had sex with me, you know, and that's it. Or Mom had sex with me. And actually, the custody ones are the interesting. Okay, then I'll get off this high horse. You don't care about this, but
custody cases.
No, you don't
do
get
we?
assigned to custody. No, thank God. I'm
Yeah.
run for the door.
Yeah.
You know. I admire anyone that does family law. I could not do it. You know, I mean, I know some people say they can do my job, but I'm thinking. You know, I do enough therapy in my office as it is, and I'm not trained, which is pretty scary. So I talked about peace officers, other law enforcement officials. They know this. They've been told this. They better do this, or they're gonna get an email from me, and kind of that. Are you freaking kidding me? You know, kind of thing. So
Why
No,
wouldn't they
what-
do it?
Hmm?
Why wouldn't a police officer do it or a law enforcement official?
well, I think when they don't do it, the problem becomes they just call the CPS worker rather than calling the hotline, and they think it's been taken care of. Like if I just call CPS, I'm reporting, not understanding I need to actually dial the number.
But it's a rule, I don't understand that. If there's a rule.
Yeah, you know,
It takes time.
lapse in training. I don't know. There could be all sorts of reasons. You just got someone who doesn't want to do it. You know, every profession you have your problems, right?
Other law enforcement, is there a definition for that? I mean, I understand that it would be sheriffs and highway patrolmen, I assume, but
Well,
how about federal law enforcement of, you know, a gun-carrying IRS agent?
well, I would say that it's probably a pretty general term. I mean, I need to report, in my opinion, under the statute
Oh,
that
I'm
I'm a
sure you
mandatory
do, yeah.
reporter, because I'm part of law enforcement, sort of. I mean, I don't carry a gun, but which is good for multiple reasons. But I would say that it's probably pretty broad. I don't know.
Don't know if
We
it
haven't
is.
challenged that. Like I mean, I can't think of a case where we've actually charged someone for failing to
Well,
report.
Probably not. I just wondered if it had been ever defined at all.
So, and
or
I'm not
in, or
aware of
out.
that.
Okay.
I go broader, but that doesn't mean that I can actually charge someone with it. All right, guardian ad litem or CASA, so that's where you come into play. And we've talked about that being in your actual capacity and role rather than just I'm at the grocery store or, you know, wherever you're at. Employee of an entity that contracts with the department to provide direct services to children. The example that I can think of here is when you guys are doing these cases, you'll probably become familiar with family concepts. And so they're kind of an organization that contracts with the department to do in-home visitation, in-home parent training. So if they're in the house in that capacity and they see something going on, they have to report it. And I'm saying something different from what they're, does this make sense? Something different from what they're already seeing. Like if you already know what's happening in the home, you don't have to keep calling and saying, hey, they're still not feeding the kid, they're still not, you know, I mean, that's different than like, oh, oops, now they're doing this to the kid, you know?
Yeah.
You should tell the CPS worker about that and keep that in your reports and let the court know, but you don't have to call every time they're doing the same exact thing, if that makes sense. I mean, if you want it, you can just keep calling, and keep them busy up there, but. All right, so how do youth in need of care cases get to court? We have to file a petition with an affidavit from the child protection specialist. So prior to the court process, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. You know, we have a meeting that occurs once a week where we staff a bunch of cases, child protection team meeting. We'll make determinations. Can we handle this on a voluntary basis? Can we do a parental agreement and move the kid out of the home for like 30 days? You know, what's the history? Does it look like we have to file? In some cases, it's an emergency situation and you don't have the time to discuss it, right? It just has to happen. You have to pull the child out. So when that happens, there's some pretty strict guidelines. Like, we don't just get to sit around and say, hey, we took a kid. When I get around to it, you see this pile on my desk? You're at the bottom. No, not going to happen. So, unlike the criminals, who I have to wait to charge until I can actually read the report, the parents were moving at a very fast pace, right? Which makes sense because we're trying to reunify the family. So if we're just sitting around, you know, waiting for us to finish all the stuff on our desk, it would never happen. Within 2 days of removal, an affidavit has to be to my office. Within 3 days from that 2 days, so 5 days total. So within 5 days of the date of the removal, we're talking business days, so we, you know, if it's the weekend or the holiday, obviously we're going to get, that doesn't count. We have to have a petition filed in a case where we have removed a child. So if a child has been removed, 5 days, it's filed in court. Now this is where the law's changed a little bit, and I'm trying to decide, I don't know my slides with me. Right, I'll talk about it when we get to the order to show cause hearings, how it's changed.
Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
That initial order, the ex parte, the judge that signs it, is that just whoever's you can catch?
It's supposed to be the judge that gets assigned, that's supposed to sign it. If, you know, and I'm not sure how they're doing that in the clerk of court's office, because sometimes, you know, judges will be on vacation or whatever, and so I guess if a judge is gone, I don't know if they're just not assigning to that judge when it comes up, or if someone else is covering for them. It should be the assigned judge, and I can't tell you that I've actually looked to check to make sure it is every single time, but it's supposed to be the assigned judge.
The next case comes up.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, it's, I'd like to think that they rotate, but then all of a sudden I'm like, how did I get like 2 cases in a row in front of you? So it's this random computer generated number thing or whatever. So however random that is, like how you get jury on a jury, right? You know, you randomly get selected now from your driver's license, and it seems like the same people, you know, keep getting pulled. So sometimes I'm like, can we get a new jury selection, please? You know, I've seen this person a few times. But they have this computer generated, so we have 4 judges in our jurisdiction. So we have A, B, C, and D, and depending upon if A or C hits, that'll determine which judge you're in front of. So they get the petition, and then there's an affidavit. That affidavit is prepared by the child protection specialist. They have to swear to oath that everything in it is true, and they have to state what their investigation was, like some facts, what the parent's statement, if they made any statement, what the history is, if there's a history, the pertinent facts and information, so dates of birth, addresses, all that kind of stuff, whether it's an ICWA case, so Indian Child Welfare case, or a non-ICWA case. And in our jurisdiction, we're very conservative about ICWA. So in some jurisdictions, they won't actually treat it as an ICWA case until they have notification that a tribe is like, hey, you know, we're going to intervene, or that kid's ICWA. We just treat it that way from the beginning. So if we suspect that either parent has any native blood in them, or even a grandparent, you know, there's some kind of possibility that we could have some tribe later come into the case and intervene, then we just treat it as ICWA, and we'll go by those standards, and I'll explain to you the difference between the two. So there's lots of different things we can do in our initial petition. The most common that you will see is temporary investigative authority, temporary legal custody, adjudication, and emergency protective services. So that's usually the petition we file, because you can combine any of these petitions into one document, so any of these requests for relief.
What does adjudication mean, since it's not up there on your stuff?
Sure. So adjudication is basically, so I should say temporary legal custody and adjudication is pretty much this, is the same. You have to have an adjudication before you're granted temporary legal custody. So I kind of, it's a different,
No problem.
adjudication is the child has to be abused or neglected, and we have to prove that by a certain standard, and I'll talk to you about that in a later slide, what that standard is. Emergency protective services is what allows us to remove the child. So when we remove the child, we're asking the court to grant us emergency protective services over this child. We're satisfying a probable cause standard for emergency protective services in non-ICWA cases. In ICWA cases, if we've removed a child, then we change that standard to clear and convincing. Okay. Temporary investigative authority is basically allows us to investigate the case for 90 days. In a situation, we could have a situation where we just ask for TIA. For instance, we can't find the kids. Oops. The parents won't make them available, you know, like they're homeschooling, they live in Stickney Creek or somewhere like that, for instance. And we have this report and this concern, but we can't find the kids, so we can't further our investigation. So we can ask for a court order to try to find the parents, to get them served, to bring them into the department, to lay eyes on them, or 90 days to further investigate. Like if a child's been harmed and we're not sure, you know, the parents are saying they didn't do it, the doctor is thinking maybe they did do something, we're trying to figure out what to do, then that 90 days can buy us time to try to investigate the case. Temporary legal custody, so that's 6 months, that has to happen after adjudication. The department can never have temporary legal custody for a period of longer than 6 months. So every 6 months, the department has to renew its request if we're going to keep custody. Or we'll file for termination, or we'll dismiss, and we'll talk about all those different options. Long-term custody, if we have a situation, we usually do this with older children, where, like say your jail example, for instance, one parent is MIA, the other parent is going to jail for 3 or 4 years, child's like 14, 15. Grandparents are willing, we got involved, they didn't make any, you know, they didn't do anything to get the children safe before they were being hauled off. So we're involved with them. In a case where we would do long-term custody to the department until the age of 18, we usually then do a consent to do a guardianship. So we'd file for long-term custody, and then the plan is to place the child with the grandparent or with the relative in a guardianship capacity, and once that guardianship goes through, we're out. So if the guardianship, the reason for the long-term custody that way, because we can just do a petition for guardianship. We could just say, well, let's just do a petition for guardianship and then we're out of it. But if something happens to the guardian, my feeling is always I'd rather have long-term custody because then it reverts back to us versus going automatically back to the parent. So that's just kind of a concern that I always have. Termination of parental rights, that can be the very first petition you file. So in an aggravated situation where you, like, well, for instance, fertility, you know, they're all so fertile. I don't know. How is this possible? Then I keep thinking, well, you're like 19, so maybe that's why, right? But it just sounds bad. But it seems like you terminate on people, and then they just have another kid. They're like, you know, I'm just going to keep having kids, so you're just going to have to keep taking them away. Carolyn actually has a story where this woman had 5 children. She just kept having babies, and Carolyn just kept taking them away. You know, she's like, listen, you know, you're not going to be able to keep your kids. Stop having them. And she actually told Carolyn that she was going to keep having them until she had a girl. She now has 7 boys, 5 of which she has no parental rights to. She figured out that Carolyn was serious, and so she moved to Great Falls, and Great Falls let her keep 2 of them. So, anyway, the situation there is if you've already terminated, for like the time that we've done it, and I've done it in our jurisdiction, is you've terminated on a parent. There was an abusive head trauma case, so we terminated the parental rights to that child and the child's sibling due to the significant injury and damage done to the child. And then she's pregnant, so she has another baby. So then, are you going to let her keep that one and possibly, you know, is there going to be injury?
So you
Or are
have
you going
to
to
wait
take that?
for abuse to occur before you can make that decision? Or is there a
Oh.
presumption that she's gonna be abusive and you can
No,
step in
that's what she
immediately?
said.
My feeling is there's a presumption that I'm not going to risk, you know, if we've just terminated on her and within the next year she's having another
pregnant
baby
again,
and
yeah.
I'm not going to take that risk. Like, I'm like, I don't need dead babies on my conscience, you know, which is a bad way to put it, but true. So we just file a petition to terminate then, because you can terminate, if you've terminated on the parent on a different child, it's been an involuntary termination. So that's a difference too. You can relinquish a child and voluntarily give a child up. But if we've actually gone through a termination hearing, which we did in that case, it was contested, the court granted termination. When she had that next baby, we removed, you know, we contacted the hospital, said, hey, make sure, you know, you let us know. We removed that child right away, and we just filed a petition to terminate from the beginning. I'm like, I'm not messing with this. You know, we just terminated. I don't trust you with babies.
How about involuntary sterilization?
That would be fabulous. If I could do that, I often think I want this, like, power. Carol and I used to talk about this, too. This is kind of like everything left, right? Like, just pick no kids for you, no kids for you, no kids for you, right? She used to do it on name, too, which is horrible. She's like, they named their kid that, they definitely shouldn't have a child. I haven't gotten that far, but yeah, I would love it. There's actually been a judge in our jurisdiction that's ordered it. It didn't get held up by the Supreme Court. We can't allow for that to happen. We just try to advocate birth control, which is hard enough in and of itself. So,
The story where you took the child, the lady had
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah.
Did she know you were going to take the baby when it was born?
yes,
Okay, she
I
knew
told
that.
her.
I was just curious
Yeah.
if she knew.
How do
Yeah,
you
she
know?
How do you know they're
I mean,
pregnant?
if it's been a while and they, you know, it's been 6 months since you terminated and
Yeah.
they're pregnant, how do you know they're pregnant again?
You know, fortunately in our town, it's a small enough town that you usually see him walking around. Like, we talk about it, we're like, is so-and-so pregnant yet? Have you seen her, you know? Like, I think she's pregnant. I'm like, no, I just saw her the other day. It's okay. No, they don't, they don't tell us. They think they're being, like, covert, like, oh, God, the baby in Billings, you know? So you end up finding out, because it's a small enough town, fortunately where we live, that someone is pregnant. Now, that particular case became horrible because she moved to Salt Lake, had another baby we didn't know about. I don't know how that happened, but that baby died. So so there's, you know, kind of, and there's a big investigation going on down there right now. So I guess I was right. You know, she doesn't need to have another baby. Unfortunately, she decided to leave because she knew I was serious about that and go find somewhere else where she could hide out.
But they could move to, say, Great Falls in your example, and your reach can't go that far.
Well, so
Or is
no.
there no coordination
If they're-
between-
Yeah, if they're living in Helena and they just go to have the baby in Great Falls, then our reach reaches that far. If they have moved to Great Falls, which is what that woman did, she just moved there, then CPS knows, but they do their own investigation in Great Falls, and then they make a determination. We're not going
So
to...
they make their own decision,
They make their own decision.
independent of
Correct.
whatever occurred here.
Correct.
So the case where you took the 5 down here and she got to keep 2 up there, they weren't influenced by the fact that you took 5 down here?
I don't know what they do in Great
I
Falls.
have to say, they
She moved back again, which is partly how I found out. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Why did Great Falls let her keep these kids? But by that time, they made this decision, so now I'm like, okay, they made a decision that she's safe with these 2 kids. I got to have some new stuff before now I can do something, right? Because there's kind of been,
Right.
yeah, so...
So if the mother would go to like the doctor for any prenatal care, is that physician then required to inform CPS that she's pregnant again?
If, I think if the doctor is aware of
they
it,
might not even know.
Um, then they should. I'm not sure I can necessarily hold them criminally liable, unless they're, you know, if they're not getting the prenatal care they need and the services that they need, or they think that they're using drugs or whatever, then sometimes we'll get those, calls in, and then we'll do like a meconium test for the drugs after the baby's born to see if the baby was exposed. my hope would be that they would. I think it depends on the doctor, and if they have knowledge of it. Because a lot of the time you're not going to go to the same provider, right? You're gonna try to, and you're not even going to see a doctor. In all honesty, you're just gonna
wait till the last minute.
right avoid it, and then all of a sudden you're at a hospital. So, but yeah, she knew that we were gonna. She was actually pregnant at the termination hearing. So we already knew, and the CPS was actually working with her, like, where do you want your baby to go? You know, because we had another child going to California. Is that the same place you want the baby to go? Or so at least she had a little bit of say, kind of which family
Why
member.
did she even have a say?
Well, you know, you try to be nice. I don't know. As much as I talk about this stuff, you know, the whole point is not to be a complete jerk, I guess. As much as I want to be. So, determination that preservation or reunification services aren't needed, that's the similar, so that would be one of the exceptions that I was talking about. They have had an involuntary termination. We're not going to risk, like, whatever they've been, the reason for the involuntary termination affects the current child. There are other things in there, so they've committed sexual abuse against a child. That is an automatic, you can file for termination. It's not an automatic you're going to get it, but you can file for termination if they've committed sexual abuse against a child. There's like torture and where's my book?
It's over here.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. Trying to see. I wonder if I have a slide on that or not. I may not have it marked. This is new. Do you see how pretty this is? There's no like ruffled. I'm just waiting. I'm like, I've had it a week, and so I only have 2 tabs marked for tonight, which is not helpful. My other one is like sticky notes and tabs everywhere. But under that determination, there's. Let's see if I can find it real quick. If I can't, I won't worry about it. Did you read this last night?
Believe it or not, all I did was skim through that.
I was just thinking you could help me. All right, it's for.
It's cute too.